There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when an empath woman begins to change the way she relates to the world. It doesn't happen overnight. It rarely comes from a place of anger. It comes from exhaustion, from pattern recognition, from the slow realization that being endlessly available emotionally has a cost, and eventually that cost becomes too high. For most of her life, her identity has been rooted in how deeply she can feel and how much she can give. She reads between the lines. She notices the shift in tone, in someone's voice, the unspoken tension in a room. And because she can feel it, she believes almost instinctively that it's her responsibility to respond to it, to soothe it, to fix it. That's where the trap begins. Over time, this constant outward focus creates an imbalance. She becomes hyper aware of others, but disconnected from herself. Her emotional energy is always flowing outward, rarely inward, and the people around her, whether intentionally or not, begin to rely on that. They expect her patience. They depend on her understanding. They assume her forgiveness is permanent, but awareness changes everything. At some point, she starts to notice a pattern. She sees that the same people who receive her empathy don't necessarily return it, that her kindness is often met with convenience, not respect, that her willingness to understand others is rarely matched by others trying to understand her. And once she sees that clearly, once she truly understands it, something shifts. This is where emotional sovereignty begins. It's important to understand she doesn't become cold. That's the misconception. People think when an empath stops caring, they've hardened. But what's actually happening is far more precise. She's becoming selective. She's learning the difference between compassion and self-abandonment. And that distinction is everything. Before, she would stay in conversations that drain her because she didn't want to hurt someone's feelings. Now, she recognizes that constantly sacrificing her own well-being to preserve someone else's comfort is not kindness. It's a lack of boundaries. Boundaries are not barriers. They are clarity. So she begins to choose. She chooses when to engage and when to step back. She chooses which relationships deserve depth and which ones remain surface level. Stops offering explanations to people who have shown no capacity to understand. And most importantly, stops volunteering her emotional energy to situations where it is neither valued nor reciprocated. This is not a reaction. It's a recalibration. A psychological shift that happens here that most people don't recognize. When someone has been consistently available, their absence creates a vacuum. The people around her begin to feel it immediately. Same empathy that was once taken for granted is now missing, and suddenly they're aware of how much they depended on it. She doesn't respond the way she used to because now her internal reference point has changed. No longer measuring her worth by how much she can give. She's measuring it by how well she can maintain alignment with herself. It's a completely different framework. And once that framework is in place, it's very difficult to go back. Philosophically, the transition from external validation to internal authority. She's no longer asking, how can I be what they need? She's asking, aligned with who I am. That question alone filters out a significant portion of what used to occupy her time and energy. And here's where it becomes powerful. Because when an empath woman operates from emotional sovereignty, her presence changes. It becomes grounded, intentional. There's no urgency to prove herself, no need to chase connection, no compulsion to fix what isn't hers to fix. She still feels deeply. Now that depth is directed with precision, not obligation. People often misinterpret this stage. They call it distance. They call it indifference. Neither. It's discipline. It's the result of someone who has studied their own patterns and decided to break them. And breaking that pattern requires something most people avoid: discomfort. It means disappointing people who were used to her constant availability. It means stepping back from dynamics that once defined her identity. It means tolerating the silence that follows when she no longer fills every emotional gap in a relationship. That silence is necessary because it creates space. And in that space, she reconnects with herself. That's the part most people overlook. It isn't just about withdrawing from others. It's about returning to self. She begins to notice what she actually feels separate from everyone else, what she actually wants, what she actually needs. And those answers are often very different from the role she's been playing for years. When she stops caring in the way she used to, it's not a loss, it's a refinement. The evolution of empathy from something reactive into something intentional. She hasn't lost her ability to care, stopped giving it away indiscriminately. And once that shift is made, reverse, because she has seen the difference between being needed and being respected, between being available and being valued. And once you understand that difference at a deep level, you don't negotiate with it anymore. You honor it. And that's the moment everything changes. When she realizes that protecting her energy isn't selfish, it's the standard. There's a noticeable shift that follows emotional sovereignty, and it often catches people off guard because when an empath woman begins to reclaim her energy, the first thing that changes isn't her presence, her communication, or more accurately, the lack of it. She used to explain everything, not just what she felt, but why she felt it. She would walk people through her intentions, her reasoning, her perspective carefully, because she believed that clarity could fix disconnection, that if she just found the right words, the right tone, the right moment, the other person would finally understand, and understanding in her mind would lead to resolution. But over time, she begins to recognize a hard truth. Not everyone misunderstands you by accident. Some people understand exactly what you're saying. They just benefit more from pretending they don't. That realization changes the entire strategy because explanation requires two things: honesty from the speaker and openness from the listener. And when one of those is missing, the entire process becomes a loop. She explains, they deflect. She clarifies, they distort. She tries again, and nothing fundamentally changes. The conversation becomes less about resolution and more about emotional expenditure. And eventually, she sees it for what it is, an inefficient use of her energy. This is where silence begins to replace explanation. Now, silence is often misunderstood. People interpret it as avoidance or even passive aggression, but in this context, it's neither. It's a decision, deliberate withdrawal from conversations that have proven to be unproductive. She's no longer engaging in dialogue where the outcome has already been demonstrated. That's a form of intelligence, because once you identify a pattern, continuing to participate in it without change isn't compassionates compliance. And she's no longer willing to comply with dynamics that diminish her. Instead of explaining, she observes. She listens more than she speaks. She pays attention to actions rather than words. And when something doesn't align, when someone's behavior contradicts their claims, she doesn't rush in to correct it. She doesn't initiate another long conversation to reconcile the inconsistency. She simply notes it, adjusts her expectations, and moves accordingly. That restraint is powerful. Cuz explanation used to be her way of maintaining connection. Silence becomes her way of maintaining clarity. And here's where the psychological shift becomes even more pronounced. When she stops explaining, she also stops seeking validation for her perspective. She no longer needs the other person to agree in order to feel secure in what she knows. That internal confidence removes the urgency from her communication. She's not trying to win the conversation anymore. She's trying to understand the reality of the situation and then act in alignment with that reality. For people who were used to her explaining, this change is disorienting. They may push for a reaction. They may try to provoke a response because the absence of her usual engagement creates uncertainty. But she doesn't respond the way she used to, not because she has nothing to say, but because she has nothing to prove. And that's a critical distinction. Silence in this context is not the absence of thought, it's the presence of decision. She has decided that not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected, that not every accusation deserves a defense, that not every relationship warrants the same level of effort. And once those decisions are made, her communication naturally becomes more selective, more precise, more intentional. There's also a philosophical layer to this. Language is often used as a tool to shape perception. And she was constantly explaining, she was in a sense negotiating her reality with others trying to align their perception of her with her own. But now she understands that perception is not something you can control through repetition. People see what they're prepared to see. And no amount of explanation can force clarity onto someone who is committed to misunderstanding. So she stops trying, not out of defeat, but out of awareness. She recognizes that her time and energy are finite resources, and she allocates them accordingly. Conversations that lead to growth, not mutual understanding or genuine connection, still receive her attention. Yet conversations that cycle through the same unresolved patterns are no longer entertained. This is where her silence becomes a boundary. Not announced, it's not justified, it simply exists. And over time, that boundary reshapes her environment. The people who are capable of meeting her at that level will adjust. They'll engage with more honesty, more accountability, more respect. And the ones who can't, who relied on her constant explanations to maintain control or avoid responsibility, will gradually fall away. That's not a loss, a filtration process, because when you remove the need to explain yourself to everyone, you also remove the pressure to maintain connections that aren't built on mutual understanding. What remains is more aligned, more stable, more real. Perhaps most importantly, she becomes more at peace. There's a quiet confidence that comes with this stage, a sense of stability that isn't dependent on how others interpret her. She knows what she meant. She knows what she did, and she's comfortable letting that be enough. That level of self-trust is not easily shaken. It changes how she moves through every interaction. Less urgency, less reactivity, less emotional volatility. She's not pulled into every disagreement or distracted by every misinterpretation. She remains centered because her sense of clarity is internally generated. And once that internal clarity is established, external noise loses its influence. So when an empath woman stops explaining, it's not because she's disengaged from the world, because she's no longer negotiating with it. She has refined her communication down to what is necessary, what is meaningful, and what is deserved. Everything else is silence, and that silence speaks with more authority than words ever could. Because at some point, you realize that the people who truly understand you never needed the explanation in the first place, the ones who demanded it, were never really listening. After the shift into silence, something even more profound begins to take shape. It's less visible, less performative, and far more consequential. This is where detachment enters not as a defense mechanism, but as a form of clarity. Now, detachment is often misunderstood. People hear that word and immediately associate it with indifference, emotional shutdown, or a kind of cold withdrawal from life. That's not what's happening here. What's happening is far more precise. She's not detaching from feeling. She's detaching from over-identifying with what she feels, and more importantly, from what other people feel asterisk. For most of her life, the boundary between her emotions and the emotions of others was blurred. She didn't just observe people's pain, she absorbed it. She didn't just notice tension, she carried it. And because of that, her reactions were often driven by a need to resolve discomfort that didn't even originate within her. That creates a very specific kind of vulnerability, because if your internal state is constantly influenced by external emotions, then your sense of stability becomes dependent on the behavior of others. If they're calm, you're calm. If they're chaotic, you're pulled into that chaos. And over time, that dynamic becomes exhausting. Detachment disrupts that pattern, introduces space between stimulus and response, between what she perceives and how she chooses to engage with it. And that space is where her power is restored. Instead of immediately reacting to someone's mood, she observes it. Instead of internalizing someone's frustration, she evaluates it. She begins to ask a different set of questions. Is this mine to carry? Is this something I can influence? Is this even aligned with my responsibility? And more often than not, the answer is no. That no is important because it allows her to remain present without becoming entangled. She can still care. She can still understand. She no longer feels compelled to merge with what she's experiencing. There's a separation now, a healthy, intentional separation. Psychologically, the difference between empathy and enchantment. Empathy allows you to recognize and understand another person's emotional state. Enchantment causes you to lose yourself within it. And for a long time, she operated in that second mode without realizing it. Detachment brings her back to the first. And once that distinction becomes clear, her perception sharpens. She starts to see people as they are, not as she hoped they would be. That's a critical turning point because hope, when it's not grounded in